Well, it helps if you know where to go.
Okay.
We're not allowed to go in.
Oh, we can go. جزاك الله خير. الله يحفظك. البيت مرتاح من الشغل. جزاك الله خير. فرصة سعيدة شوي.
Again. Are we good? Let's go. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the session. Just to check, you are in the session on climate finance in the MENA region, where we stand and the way forward. Is that okay? Everyone came to listen to all our experts on climate finance, whatever you wanted to know, to learn about that. That's cool. Right, great. Thank you very much. So I'm Carlos de Freitas. I'm strategy advisor to the Global Fund for Cities Development, FMDV. I'd like to thank first the World Bank Group and UNESCO who are co-organizing this session with us. We are here to set the scene on climate finance in the MENA region. What's so funny about that? And the idea is to present the different perspectives coming from a wide array of institutions, stakeholders, coming from the subnational level to the national level and backwards, and DFIs, of course, the development finance institutions. We have also a representative from Jordan. Thank you, Ms. Al-Sharif, who will introduce the case of what it is to implement a climate finance policy at a central level. And we will, the idea is to conclude somehow on the way forward, taking advice on these experts and designing somehow what could be the discussion during COP27 and the partnerships that should be implemented. I would like to call the distinguished panelists for the first panel. Mr. Venkataputi, you are Program Manager, Carbon Markets and Innovation for the World Bank. Please join me on stage. And Ms. Shada Al-Sharif, Climate Finance Advisor to the Prime Minister Office, Kingdom of Jordan. I changed your title because you gave me the word. And sorry, your lead consultant, no, not at all. No, I lost my, yes, introduce yourself, please.
Oh, I'm the investment lead at the Prime Minister's Delivery Unit in Jordan. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. Puti, do you want to present here or on your chair?
Where is the remote?
It's here.
Okay. Yeah.
I will leave you the floor. Is that okay? Or do you Can you see this presentation?
Yes. Thank you, Carlos. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session. And let me begin by, first of all, thanking the organizers, FMDV, and all the partners which are organizing this session. So I have been given the role of setting the scene along with the madam here. So I will quickly run through what we see as some of the challenges that we need to tackle when we are talking about climate finance in this region. Of course, over the last 2.5 days, I think there already have been a few sessions on climate finance. So I think that discussion has been going on. So some of you may have already followed some of these. So rather than actually talking about the kind of past and all those things, let's look at some of the future challenges that we have. But just to begin with, very clearly, MENA is one of the most climate vulnerable regions in the world, given the kind of geophysical features and other factors here. However, over the last half a decade at least, we have seen that the countries in the MENA region have been firmly committed to climate action on various fronts. And as you could see that nationally determined, all the countries except I think one, they have submitted the nationally determined contributions, which are voluntary pledges that the countries made to the UN system. And then we have, carbon neutrality commitments from some countries, and some countries have declared net zero targets, and also some private sector entities and financial institutions have taken on pledges in terms of net zero. For example, the banking alliance that we have in some countries. And also at the Glasgow COP26, there have been a number of important pledges that have been made. The Global Methane Pledge, which has been endorsed by a number of countries in the region. the Green Grids Initiative, the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on Forests and Land Use, the Low Carbon Climate Resilient Health System. So there are a number of pledges that have covered different sectors that are relevant to the climate action. And overall, if you look at the NDCs that have been submitted, the estimate is that we need something like close to $200 billion if you want to implement all these NDCs. And if you look at the overall global picture, global climate finance has steadily increased over the last 10 years or so. And in 2019, 2020, it reached over $600 billion. However, if we really want to meet the target of 1.5 degrees of the Paris Agreement, we need to actually increase the climate finance globally almost 6 times annually to meet that kind of target. So we are actually talking about something like $3 to $4 trillion every year if you want to meet that target. Of course, in the meanwhile, we also had, how do you go? We also had the pandemic over the last 2 years, and the impacts of the pandemic on the country's economies is still, to be fully understood. So that may change some of these figures significantly, but definitely the needs are going to be quite enormous. However, if you look at the MENA region itself, you could say that climate finance flows to the region have been very, very small. In fact, so far only about 2.5% of the total climate finance has actually come into this region. So that's very, very low compared to other regions. And also, whatever climate finance that has come into the region has been concentrated in just a few large projects. As you could see here, there are about 140 projects totaling about $1.5 billion between 2003 and 2020. So that again is a very, very small number, and of that, almost over $800 million actually was contributed by the Climate Investment Fund, the Climate Technology Fund, which is for projects just in 2 countries, Morocco and Egypt, and then there are a few regional projects. As I said already, it is concentrated in a few countries. Egypt and Morocco actually have received together almost 50% of the total climate finance in the region, and 4 countries actually had no climate finance of any kind. So this actually gives a very kind of skewed picture as far as the climate finance is concerned. And within that, we could also see that most of the climate flows in the region have actually gone towards mitigation and not so much on adaptation. So you could see that there's a very stark difference between allocations for mitigation and adaptation. So that is actually going to be one of the challenges going forward to balance that. But looking at the different countries and the economies, you could see that there are major opportunities that can be exploited in terms of attracting climate finance. So I won't go into all these details, but if you look at the first 2, you're talking about the topmost priorities that are in the region, as everybody was talking about over the last 2-3 days, which is food security and water. And in each of these countries, there are a number of opportunities that can be exploited to mobilize climate finance in these sectors. And also, in terms of mobilizing this finance, the region will need to look at all kinds of financial tools and instruments. So whether it is project-based financing, financial incentives, fiscal incentives, de-risking investments, public investments, non-financial incentives, market-based approaches. Now with the agreement on Article 6, it is possible to use market mechanisms for this, and also instruments such as green bonds and so on. So there are all these options, are available, and depending on the potential for each of these in each of these countries, they need to be exploited. As I said, carbon markets under the Paris Agreement and the domestic carbon pricing is one such option, which actually offers very strong potential for additional revenues, generating additional revenues. And there are, again, a number of opportunities in different sectors to use carbon markets in the various countries. In fact, the World Bank actually had a program called Partnership for Market Readiness over the last 10 years, and we worked with 3 countries in the region, Jordan, Morocco, and Tunisia, to build their readiness for applying carbon pricing and markets, and we need to take that to the next step in the future. And in all these, actually, World Bank group has been playing in a role. We recently, last year, approved the Climate Change Action Plan, and as per that, we have a number of targets. In fact, if you look at the period between 2016 and 2020, the World Bank, financed projects worth $6.4 billion with what we call climate co-benefits, exceeding the 21% target that we set ourselves in 2015. And the new roadmap that we have, the Climate Change Action Plan till 2025, envisages a target of 35%. And there we are hoping to deploy about $10 billion of assistance over the next 5 years, and also focus on energy transition and low carbon mobility, the transport, and climate smart cities and resilient coastal economics, and sustainable finance for climate action. These are going to be the 4 priorities. And also, we have taken a pledge under the Climate Change Action Plan to support both adaptation and mitigation equally to redress the balance between the 2 aspects of climate action. So what are some of the concluding messages as far as MENA is concerned? We feel that MENA as a whole is strongly committed to climate action, but we'll need to focus on balancing finance flows for adaptation and also on loss and damage, the new area of activity that is coming up. And we need to build thematic partnerships among regional organizations for collective action, and fostering multi-actor coordination between developmental banks and the national financial institutions. Obviously, if the climate finance flows are coming in, then the national financial institutions have to play an important role, so they have to be an actor. And strengthening capacity of national and subnational actors and institutions for alignment of climate action at all levels. So we need to engage all the stakeholders, whether it is academia, think tanks, civil society organizations, and youth networks, but more importantly, the private sector involvement for investment and implementation is going to be very critical. And obviously, we need to mobilize that private sector participation by addressing regulatory barriers, perceived risks and returns, and also account for political instability and other factors. So on the first day, we heard from the minister of Egyptian minister, that there is a plan, climate finance plan under preparation for COP27. And we hope that that plan would actually cover some of these priorities as we see, and hopefully that will lead to launching a very sustained effort on bringing climate finance flows to this region. So let me stop at that, and I'm sure the speakers that come after me are going to elaborate on some of these issues. Thank you very much. Let me come this side.
Is it working? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Putti. We're going to have a reality check somehow with you, because yes, there are a lot of opportunities out there, but how complex it is to integrate that in a national domestic policy. Ms. Al-Sharif, you are Investment Priority Lead at the Prime Ministry Delivery Unit.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank
In
you,
Jordan.
Thank you. Indeed. Thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you so much to ESCWA and World Bank for organizing this session today. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So yeah, as Carlos said, maybe we'll take a little bit of a kind of a situation in Jordan, trying to translate all of the ideas that Venkat has just said. So in the recent launch of the Saudi Green Initiative, the Crown Prince made reference to the number of climate challenges faced in Jordan, primarily water scarcity. And he linked it directly to some of the policy actions the country is taking in introducing our Green Growth National Action Plan in 2021-2025, which looks at 6 sectors: agriculture, energy, water, and waste management. And so this shows you the high-level support for the green agenda in Jordan, starting with the king himself. obviously the region and Jordan, even as here we're at a conference and speaking about all these impending challenges, we're actually already feeling the heat and feeling these challenges. So the number of heat waves and droughts is increasing. Precipitation patterns are clearly more volatile, less predictable. Shared water resources, I mean here rivers, shared riparian rivers, and extreme weather events are increasing in intensity. So this is obviously what is moving policy in Jordan, the things that are being felt on the ground by people, the loss of lives, the loss of livelihoods. And the key vulnerable sectors as captured in our national adaptation plan, as you can imagine, would be agriculture, a very significant loss of productivity. And ESCO has actually studied and documented this and quantified the anticipated impact through their RICAR platform. So agriculture, water stress, there's an anticipation of 80 to 100 million people expected to undergo water stress by 2025. Of course, health and well-being, vector-borne diseases, and highly vulnerable population because of the large number of refugees. 1 in 5 people you meet in Jordan is a refugee, and women and youth in our adaptation plan as identified as particularly vulnerable. And so the idea behind all of this is that we want to change the narrative for a country like Jordan. We keep hearing it's the second most water scarce country in the world. But through a green growth agenda, it can become water efficient and become a leader in wastewater reuse. We depend on energy imports still, 92%, but maybe we're increasing, and we are on the ground, solar, wind, a contribution to energy mix, and e-mobility. Today, only 7% of waste is recycled, but we are seeing projects pop up on waste to energy. There's an interesting one by the EBRD in Amman, composting, recycling, huge opportunity for investment there. Again, a vulnerable population. What can we do to make sustainability work for both refugees and host communities? And unemployment is at an all-time high, especially post-COVID. So what can the green agenda deliver in terms of jobs for youth and women? So the idea is to change really the big challenge we find ourselves in today as a country into the next big opportunity. And so based on this, you will find a pretty rich policy and regulatory platform in Jordan on green economy and climate change. It was one of the first countries to issue a climate change policy before it was even fashionable in 2013. And it's currently being updated with this outlook to a 2050 net zero target. During COVID 2020, we were on a Zoom call and the minister launched 6 sectoral green growth action plans that I just mentioned to you. And they have very clear pipeline. And the reason I mention this is that with these documents, there is a pipeline of projects. There are 86 interventions with a clear financing need, $1.8 million. And similarly, the NDCs were updated before Glasgow with a new ambitious target and 35 projects that also have been studied, cost-benefit analysis done, and a clear financing gap of $7.5 billion. 25% of that is conditional, so that requires international finance. In addition to what's happening at the national level, there's local level policy planning. So the Greater Amman municipality has issued a Green City Action Plan. I'm being partial to EBRD, but they also helped to deliver that GCAP. It's actually also has its own pipeline of projects on the city level with clear financing gaps in the key sectors and very quantified targets. So all of that would not be possible on the ground if we didn't have a legal framework. So we do have a renewable energy efficiency law, and this is how the country was able to unlock a renewable energy market back in 2012. Similarly, a waste management law was issued in 2020, and we have yet to see the same kind of investment in waste, but I think that's where the next opportunities will be. Also, a climate change bylaw. That's very important to regulate the climate change policy framework. It called for the creation of a national climate change committee with 16 institutions represented, headed by the Minister of Environment. So the governance, all these things are complex. We're talking about complexity, and so this is the kind of things that are happening. And the decentralization agenda is that not everything is happening in central government, but also through municipalities and local governance. So just to give you an example of the steps taken to produce this Green Growth Action Plan. We've been working on it since 2017. And when we say green growth, I just want to quickly say what the definition is for that, for Jordan. It's economically growth that is environmentally sustainable, but also socially inclusive. So the social part is also just as important. And you can see in the early years, the last 5 years, it was a lot of planning work. Now we're in the process of implementation. This year, the country has their pipeline ready. We need to seek out sources of financing. I'll say a little bit more about that in the next slides. And that's the kind of impact that we hope to achieve on the right. That's really where we're trying to get to, is the economic growth. Our GDP has been stuck for 10 years, poverty reduction, and most of these actions are climate action. 53 out of 86 are climate action, so they fall under adaptation and mitigation. So I want to show you that it's not just about papers and policies. We do actually also have projects on the ground that are increasingly giving faith in the green agenda, that it's really not just elitist ideas pushed out by Ministry of Environment. This is actually job creating, FDI attracting projects. You come and you see a efficient wastewater treatment plant, wind farms, waste to energy, public transport, native forests, when we talk about nature-based solutions, constructed wetlands for treating wastewater. And houses of worship putting solar PV. So it's not just documents, is what I wanted to say. And that's important really to give teeth to this agenda. So I showed you what we're doing on the green climate policy side. What we're doing on the economic policy side is try to marry those two agendas together. So in our economic recovery documents, like our reform matrix, our green recovery plan, an indicative executive program, these are the very basic economic documents that are issued by Ministry of Planning. We're starting to see the marrying of the two agendas, and I think that's really necessary for the transformation to take place, is Ministries of Planning, Ministry of Finance to be on board with the recommendations of the Ministry of Environment. An important assessment that was done with support from the World Bank, one of the first in the world, is a PEFA climate, or a Public Expenditure Financial Accountability Assessment. We were able to see as a country how our public financial management system, where are the gaps. And one of the things that came out of that is that we need to first as a country define what is climate expenditure in order to identify it in the national budget, in order to say how we're actually using our own resources to contribute to climate change, even before asking for international finance. We need to identify our own resources. I also want to call out here a very important enabling project, a 750 million World Bank program for results, which has 3 pillars. So looking, as I said, at climate public expenditure in the national budget, but also mobilizing private investment and looking at the whole climate finance governance framework. So we are talking about how do you effectively link Ministry of Environment with Ministry of Planning, with Ministry of Finance. That whole cycle is something that we're working on right now. So I think that's the next step needed to really start seeing projects and financing come in. This is an example of an exercise I contributed to last year this is the economic reform matrix for Jordan. We have integrated some green ideas into this. So for example, green procurement in the second one. So how you can use public procurement to channel green projects. Green bond guidelines were issued. So this is an invitation also to the private sector. With the vocational training center, we're talking about green vocational jobs. So we're trying to do this cross-cutting look with other aspects of the economy, because at the end of the day, these are our economic targets in Jordan: jobs, investments, exports, and how can they all become green. So the takeaways from all of this is, as Venkat said, this is a whole of government. It's actually a whole of country agenda. And this is the kind of input needed from each of the stakeholders. So the government has to start with clarity of vision. We're updating our economic vision right now as we speak in Jordan, and green will feature. We'll start to all see the same language come up at the vision level, strategy level, regulations, and then of course enforcement of those regulations. And as I said, linking the economic policy with the green and climate frameworks on both national and local level. The innovative financing is so important, so we're now advancing on our Article 6 strategy and plan with World Bank and others. Adaptation financing is, again, a priority. As I mentioned, green bonds, debt for climate swaps is one of the things being done with ESCWA at the moment that can help Jordan improve its fiscal challenge. Mobilizing public, private, and development finance. So as I said, when we talk about climate finance, we're not just talking about international sources. What can the country do with its own national budget in the right way? And of course, all of this to work is the last line, and this is maybe where I work at the delivery unit, is that we do need still systems to deliver on this, monitor on this, and assess the impact. And the MRV system is very helpful in that, but also the NRIP. I don't want to get too technical, but we're trying to link our public management, the system that you input all your public projects into it, link that to your MRV, climate change GHG monitoring system. So the whole value chain is starting to link up very nicely. So that's what government is doing. So government's very busy. Private sector is being invited to invest in these climate responsive projects. We have a ready pipeline, as I mentioned to you, the 35 NDC projects, the 86 green growth projects. The pipeline is there, it's studied, and it's welcoming to the private sector. So green hydrogen is one of the areas, energy, e-mobility, transport, all the areas that Venkat mentioned, agriculture, and also a PPP framework. We've got a PPP law that enables public-private partnerships. And I want to also just stop at green entrepreneurship, because that's a very active area in Jordan. We're finding a lot of youth that are engaging in startups that solve environmental pollution. Or environmental challenges, sorry. Of course, the donors, international partners are very active and very important in all of this story. And of course, there's a need for us to see more prioritization of adaptation finance and resilience finance. And we need to link to all these global frameworks, the EU Green Deal, the SDGs, and all of that. And finally, of course, the role of NGOs, academia, in raising awareness and involving citizens in all of this. So this is kind of my takeaway slide, is that the building blocks for all of this need to be at the regulatory level, the institutions need to be on board, and finally the projects and finance, both on the national and international partners collaborating. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. That was brilliant, really. Thank you. I studied the Jordan policy a few years ago, and yes, it's really amazing how clear and straight to the point it is. If you allow me, Venkata, I'm going to ask the first question. What are you missing? What is the key element that you need for the coming years? Oh, you have the mic, yes.
Is that still working? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so thank you, Carlos, for that question. What is still needed, I think, is for it to really be adopted as a center of government. Sorry. I think what's still missing is for this to be adopted as a center of government agenda, as a national priority. So I was actually, funnily enough, on a call this morning exactly on how do we operationalize all of this. And I think we're just missing that one last push at the highest level of government to say that the green economy climate agenda is a top priority for Jordan, and all the sectors have to play a part. They've all been involved in developing these documents, but when it comes to that September every year when you issue your projects to the national budget, they're not always necessarily linking it back to green growth or back to climate. So I think just that one step, just as I was saying, that linkage between planning, financing, and linking the sectoral strategies to the green growth agenda, I think that's the last step missing. And of course, putting the money, I think, in through our national resources, but also through international resources. I would say that's the next step right now. Yeah.
Changing the mindset of the sectors, which is really hard, because they need the capacity building for that, and to renew the economic models. Venkata. International funding, financing. Two questions, actually. You have here a champion country. You already have a lot of programs and projects. From outside, what would be the next step? What could you add to this already wide range of projects there? And in terms of adaptation for Africa, for the MENA region especially, what can the World Bank do considering the pledge?
Thank you. First of all, let me just comment as an extension of what you have kind of presented. When we are talking about climate finance, essentially we are talking about two things. One is that financing green, and then we say that greening finance. So these are the two essential elements of actually mobilizing climate finance. So on one hand, we look at mobilizing investments for various projects and programs. So that is essentially financing green. But greening finance is actually much more complicated, because then, as you're saying, you need to try and green the budget process. You need to try the reform or greening the financial sector as a whole. So that's a much bigger challenge. And if you can actually tackle that challenge, then I think your green plan is going to be kind of successful. I think that is one.
That's a good point.
And coming to what we can do from outside, of course, as we have, as she has shown, in Jordan, we are actually working with them in a number of different areas, and we simply need to kind of scale up. Where that is one big challenge, and second is we need to consciously adopt a policy that would balance between mitigation and adaptation. Because historically, adaptation is one area, though everybody recognizes, is more important in the kind of short and medium run because of the climate problems that the countries are facing. But it hasn't received as much, support and attention as mitigation side has, received. So, in fact, that is the reason why in the Climate Change Action Plan that we, formally approved last year, we took a conscious pledge to make the investments 50-50 on both mitigation and adaptation. Of course, in terms of identifying the priorities is a kind of a country by country basis, depending on the specific requirements and needs. But on the whole, I think that conscious policy decision, not only on the part of the World Bank and other international agencies, but also on the part of the countries, I think is very critical, and that is where the vision and some of the things that you talked about at the country level are going to play a big role.
Thank you. Basically, the question is how to ensure that adaptation becomes sexy.
We'll ask him.
I will, and we will also have central bank point of view from Morocco to about greening the financial system. Adaptation, sexy. What can you say? What are you doing in Jordan?
Okay, well, I mean, I think adaptation can be very, attractive, but I think it needs to be packaged. There are many projects that have adaptation and mitigation co-benefits. Maybe we can start with those, right? So wastewater, waste management, you're at the same time reducing greenhouse gases, but also improving air quality, water aquifer, water treatment. So those are already somehow attractive and bankable. So let's do that. But let's also identify where, I was in a panel 2 days ago, and they were saying wastewater sometimes is not seen as an adaptation project. So how do we package what is considered adaptation? Could be a way to open up new opportunities. Tourism for us can be seen also as, anything that has job creation potential is adaptation for a country like Jordan. Because, without jobs, people are still vulnerable, they're in poverty. So tourism accounts for a large part of our GDP. So we're going towards now ecotourism. These are opportunities to really invest and, attract the private sector, but also can help people create new income sources, women, rural development. They're very key for adaptation. So I would say, how do we redefine adaptation? It's not just the usual kind of projects. Let's be a bit more creative. Yeah.
Thank you, and we can count on Jordan for that. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Carlos, if I can just add one thing to that.
Of course you can.
Thank you. I think, we should, in this regard, in terms of making it, sexier, as you put it, we should look at the work that's being done by the African Development Bank. Actually, they are focused in the last 3-4 years on actually developing, using market mechanisms for adaptation, sectors. And if some of those things, actually go forward and become successful, I think that will be a good game changer as far as adaptation is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to call the second panel, and you'll join later for the picture, and maybe if we have time for a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can, yes, and we might have time for questions from the audience. So prepare your questions. Second panel, multi-level and multi-stakeholder collaboration for maximizing access to climate finance. Way forward. I'm calling Mr. Nabil Badr, Deputy Director of Banking Supervision, Bank-Al-Maghrib from Morocco, and an active member of the Network for Greening Financial System. I'm calling Mr. Jan Willem van de Ven, Head of Climate Finance and Carbon Markets at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. You can come on stage, thank you. We have online, I hope so, Ms. Dalia El Awari, Lead Consultant for the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, UNEP FI. Yes, you are online. Thank you for joining us. And Mr. Mohan Lancer, Honorary Chairman of the Moroccan Association of Governors and former Minister of Home Affairs in Morocco. Please join us on stage 2.
Oh, then I need my, you have my presentation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, okay.
If that's okay, Nabil, you will start. Thank you. We're all set to listen to you, so whenever you're ready. It's not working? Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Carlos. I'm glad to participate in this session, and I congratulate United Arab Emirates for organizing this event. As mentioned by Dr. Ankita Ramana Aputi, the MENA region is particularly vulnerable to climate change, which exposes our countries to chronically higher temperatures and drought, and a greater frequency of extreme events such as floods and fires. The physical impact of climate change are likely to affect key economic sectors such as agriculture, livestock, and fisheries, particularly in North African countries. And in Morocco, for example, the agriculture sector, which is mainly rain-fed, contributes 12% of national GDP and is the largest employer with 33% of the population. And I want to mention that in Morocco, the government has chosen an ambitious energy positioning and a political commitment to climate change adaptation and mitigation via nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. And Morocco has also recently committed to decarbonizing the economy through a low-carbon development strategy for 2050, in line with the ambition of the Paris Agreement. And the need to support the commitments made by our country to the Paris Climate Agreement led the Central Bank of Morocco on the sidelines of the COP 2022, in Marrakesh to adopt a sectoral roadmap for alignment of the financial system with the objectives of green and sustainable development. And this roadmap is based on 5 strategic levers, namely the governance of socio-environmental risks, the development of green and sustainable financial instruments, the capacity building and transparency, and integrates a financial inclusion component as a policy to promote the climate and the environmental resilience of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable populations. It also integrates a regional dimension to foster the emergence of sustainable finance in Africa, because you know there is 3 banks, Moroccan banks have 33 subsidiaries in African countries. And the central bank, whose mission is to guarantee the financial stability and ensure the banking supervision, have a key role to play in encouraging banking actors to adapt and contribute to climate risk mitigation. In this context, I will focus on the action undertaken by Bank-Al-Maghrib to put in place a regulatory framework for the orientation and the alignment of finance with the objectives of the Paris Agreement, and strengthening of the banking sector resilience to climate risk with the support of our international partners. And to support green finance, the Central Bank of Morocco has been working on to reinforce coordination with the national stakeholders, but also and above all cooperation with the regional and international bodies to advance green and sustainable finance, like a network of greening financial system. And the bank has therefore embarked on a program of actions relating to national coordination, capacity building, and contribution to international work on NGFS. We are working on the three work stream about to reinforce the microprudential, the macro, and the role of central bank as a company in the field of monetary policy. And we are working gradually to establish a regulatory framework and the management of financial risk. To management risk, financial risk related to climate change with the support of the World Bank. After a first phase of under the sign of commitment, because the roadmap was voluntary, it was no binding rules. And the Bank-Al-Maghrib has issued a regulatory directive defining the expectation towards banking actors in terms of financial risk management and related to the climate change and the environment. And through this directive, this regulatory text, Bank-Al-Maghrib wishes to encourage banks to integrate climate and environmental issues into their existing systems and to progressively improve the management of the associated in their business portfolio, including in Africa. It also aims to send a strong signal to market players in order to catalyze national efforts in the field of sustainable development and to stimulate new financial commitments in favor of the transition towards a green economy. The directive calls on banks to deploy a development strategy that takes into account climate and environmental imperatives and requires the alignment of investment, financing, and lending policies with these imperatives. It also requires the banking sector to understand the financial sector risk it faces from global warming and environmental degradation to ensure capacity building in these areas and to develop tools to measure and assess this risk. And the directive calls on banks to deploy development strategy that takes into account climate and environmental imperative and requires the alignment of investment financing, lending policies, and these imperatives. It also requires the banking sector to understand the financial risk it faces from global warming and environmental degradation to ensure capacity building in this area and to develop tools to measure and assess their risks. And we have supervisory expectations, set as supervisory expectation for banks on managing the financial risk from climate change through governance, risk management, scenario analysis, and disclosure. And banks are called to address climate risk through existing risk management framework, involve governance bodies, put in place scenario analysis to capture the flow of risk, which may not be obvious immediately, and to disclose information on climate and environmental related risk following TCFD and the PRI standards. And the directive covers physical and transition risk and draws a central bank best practices and international standard development by TCFD with regards to integrating climate-related risk into strategic planning, governance, and risk management framework, as well as developing climate-related risk metrics and indicators. And the Bank Maghrib has engaged with the World Bank in a technical program on the supervision and control of climate risk divided into several components over a 2-year period. The component of this program concern, firstly, the assessment of climate-related financial risks in the financial sector. The second is the integration of these risks into banking supervision practices. And the third one is training and capacity building of supervisors and banking actors on good practices in climate-related risk management. The first phase of this technical assistance program to assess the banking sector's exposure to physical and transition climate risk underway. It has involved several data collection exercises, stakeholders interviews, and initial work on estimating banks' exposure to physical and transition climate risk. The objectives of the first step are to identify the specific climate risk in Morocco and the channels of transmission to the banking sector, assess the banking sector's exposure to physical and transitional risks, and develop forward-looking scenarios to study the sector's vulnerability to climate shocks. The next action agreed upon in the framework of BAM's Green Finance Action Program include, with the World Bank, capacity building of the banking sector and the BAM, Bank-Al-Maghrib, on the management of the Cette risk with the potential support of the NGFS and the definition of a related training program. The opportunity to pool this action is at regional and continental level is also considered. And the issuing of regulatory guides for the banking sector on the design and implementation of climate stress test scenarios and the establishment of a regulatory reporting framework for banks and the development by Bank-Al-Maghrib of a simplified taxonomy for the banking sector to use as a basis of climate risk exposure assessment and the reporting exercise with the assistance of IFC. And I just want to mention that on the occasion of the last COP in Glasgow, Bank-Al-Maghrib renewed its commitment to accelerate the greening of the financial system with a future local and regional action plan aiming among several key projects to support the development of green financial products by the banking ecosystem and its support in the management of climate risk, and to reinforce a dialogue with the public and the private stakeholders on incentives to direct financial flows toward the green economy. And now the action of the central bank are no substitute for a more comprehensive policy agenda on climate and green economy. Efforts are still needed to unlock the potential of green finance and to address the challenges of a low market demand, lack of reliable data due to absence of a national taxonomy, and a lack of expertise in developing analytical and modeling tools for climate risks. These challenges require the mobilization of all stakeholders at the national level and an exchange of experience on good risk management practices observed at the international level in order, firstly, to remove constraints on both the supply side of financial institutions and the demand side of economic actors, and reinforce the fiscal and regulatory incentives and activate research and development of new technologies that should underpin the development of a green and sustainable economy. And the third one, to maximize the leverage effect of private climate finance. And the last one is improve the availability of data on climate and climate finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nabil. Thank you very much for the presentation. We'll get back to you. I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Dalia El Awahi. Thank you very much for joining us. You were the lead author of the report you did for UNEP FI on the climate finance landscape in the region. Could you tell us a little bit more about the private climate investments in the region? I give you the floor. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you for, let me start by thanking the organizers. The private sector is undoubtedly a key partner for financing and implementing climate action in the region. And there is a much strong need to crowd in private investment for climate action, bringing in much needed innovation, know-how, and technological upgrading whenever commercially viable. I will first start by highlighting some of the barriers to promoting climate finance in the region and that have acted as barriers to crowding in and to attracting private investment to climate action. I would then move to discussing some of the ways to promote climate finance and hence to raise and increase private sector engagement in climate action in the region. Let's start by the barriers first. First, the lack of good quality data and absence of commonly adopted definitions, standards, metrics, and methodologies have all acted as barriers to increasing finance to green, responsible, and environment-friendly investment. Second, the absence of adequate regulatory support. No explicit climate-related financial regulation has been enacted, and you find that environmental, social, and governance (ESG) guidelines have been enacted by financial sector regulators as reference guidelines framework, not really to be adopted by finance providers or investors as a mandatory requirement for accessing finance or reporting and disclosure. Third, the lack of incentives to finance the transition to green, climate resilient economies. Most economies in the region, like Jordan and Egypt, have offered incentives within the framework of sustainable energy to increase private investment for sectors such as renewables and energy efficiency. But no explicit incentives have been directed to finance providers to promote their participation in scaling up climate finance. Fourth, there are market barriers to raising private investment in climate-related projects. These are associated and related with difficulties to identify and to structure climate-related investment opportunities. And this is particularly the case in climate adaptation, which has a public good nature and which have high transaction costs and has been characterized by low commercial readiness, hence a huge barrier to private investment in climate action. On a more positive note, I believe that holding COP27 in November in Egypt next November presents a good opportunity for countries of the region to not only to speed up the implementation of their 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, but also to advance their work on climate action, whether it is mitigation, adaptation, or resilience building. And work could be undertaken across a number of pillars. First, on attracting private investment in climate action, special attention should be dedicated to sectors and projects that may have been characterized by low commercial readiness due to high transaction costs, long payback period, and uncertain market returns, and which have been perceived by the private sector as of low profitability, as has been the case in climate adaptation, as I noted earlier, and where there is a dire need for both technical and financial support. To that end, it is important to align private incentives with public interest in order to ensure an appropriate level of risk sharing between public and private sectors. This can be achieved through financial engineering mechanisms, such as blended finance and well-structured public-private partnership deals. Second, it is important for countries of the region to work on developing a pool and a pipeline of bankable climate investment-related opportunities. This pool of projects should be identified and prepared during the national planning and budgeting phase and should reflect national priorities and climate action needs. This would present the private sector with a pipeline or a business deal flow on climate action work for the coming few years. In sectors such as the coastal zone protection, agriculture, ecotourism, water resources, and irrigation. As a matter of fact, these sectors have been already noted in the nationally determined contribution by countries like Egypt, Tunisia, and Jordan as the most vulnerable to climate change and where financial and technical support is very much needed. Third, it is important to raise the readiness of the financial sector, whether banking or non-banking, to mobilize resources needed to finance climate action in the region. Here, there is a need to align the mandate of financial sector with the country's aspired transition to green, more resilient, and more inclusive economies. This can be achieved by enhancing the integration of ESG consideration into the financial system, core strategy, business, model, and operation by enacting climate change-related rules and regulation and endorsing ESG consideration as for mandatory reporting and disclosure. It may be also instrumental to provide finance providers and institutions with incentive to promote climate finance, hence increasing funding flows towards green and environment-friendly investment. This may include preferential rate, credit allocation policies, and priority sector lending, as has been the case in countries like India and Bangladesh. Fourth, MENA region could work, or countries of the region should work on a collective basis to develop a climate finance taxonomy to be tailored to better reflect the region climate action, priorities, and needs. Gradual adoption of such taxonomy would enable the various stakeholders, whether financial sector regulators, finance providers, and investors, to better understand climate-related issues, risks, and opportunities, and hence to better respond to market needs and opportunities. Fifth, countries of the region ought to work on reviewing and updating their cost estimates for climate action needed. This is particularly important in the wake of the pandemic and in light of most recent events at the global scene, and which have all added fiscal pressures for most countries of the region. Countries like Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Tunisia in 2015 have already submitted their nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC, and where each country indicated its national climate targets, priorities, and cost estimate for needed climate action. For instance, for Egypt, the national climate action, Egypt estimated that national climate action would require about $73 billion over the 2020-2030 period. Some countries have already updated and revised upward their estimates for climate action, others have not. I believe that all countries in the region need to do that, to revise their estimate upwards. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. So much to do for private sector investment. Thank you very much. We can applause because she's not here, but she can listen to hear you. Thank you very much. I'll get back to you in a few minutes. Jan Willem, are you ready?
Almost.
You want to go there? Yes?
I go there and
okay.
And I hide it.
So you're head of climate finance and carbon markets at the Bird. EBRD, yes, sorry, I'm French. I love your socks, by the way. Please take the floor and introduce to us your magic.
Okay, I have some spare socks if you. So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm, as a matter of fact, I'm going to change job title. I'm going to head, let's say, the unit on international climate policy and engagement. But as to content, I don't think a lot will change. Just on EBRD, so we are active in the so-called MENA, but we're not active in all the countries. We are active in Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Tunisia, Lebanon, West Bank, and Gaza. And we started in 2011. So we don't have let's say we have a decade of track record now. And we invested in the meantime over close to 16 billion in over 300 projects in the region. As EBRD, we work across the economy. So we're working with the financial sector, with local banks. We work in industry. We also, as you have seen, in the municipal sector, and yeah, so that's where we are active. We work a lot in our operations, of course, because of the issues, the challenges the region is facing. We work a lot also with other financiers, other donors, like, for example, the EU is an important one, the Global Environment Facility, the Climate Investment Funds, and the Green Climate Fund. Let's say on this slide is already notable that 42% of our finance in this region is already what we deem as green. Let me, I had to pick up this thing because my eyesight on that monitor is a bit too far away. So this is our portfolio composition at the moment. So a lot in sustainable infrastructure, then followed by financial institutions, so other banks and leasing companies and so on, and industry, commerce, and agri-business are important. We have in-country presence, so a number of countries like Egypt and Morocco, we have even several offices, and a number of example projects. So in Cairo, we finance now or co-finance the Cairo Metro, and that is going to help quite a couple of million people. Then in Morocco, we work together with UNES on accessing drinking, giving, let's say, almost 500,000 people access to clean drinking water. We have agribusiness, and important irrigation is also important, and that's an example in Tunisia. Then we have we also do the large scale. So we have a very good, I helped to develop this Benban solar project, which used to be, I think, the largest solar project in the world. I'm not sure it's still there, but and it would be a good thing if it's not still there, because we need an awful lot more solar energy, of course. This is we provided 368 million in finance, and with a number of other partners, Proparco, FMO, Islamic Corporation for the Development of the Private Sector, ISDB, the Commercial Bank of China, and of course the Green Climate Fund. So that's all what we done as 2 examples. Now, as to the EBRD business model, so as the names indicate, we are a bank and provide finance, but we do an increasing amount of work on what we call policy dialogue and mobilizing concessional co-finance and helping to make that work towards also technical assistance. On our banking operations, we have our green economic transition mandate, which means that by 2025, half of our activities should be green finance, which we already achieved last year. So but we hope to maintain that picture, throughout. Another important one for the MDBs is, including us, is the alignment with the Paris Agreement. And this is a bit type of the regulatory framework that comes to us, also informed by developments like the TCFD, and it's very akin to what is happening under the NGFS. So it's really about banks needing to demonstrate that the projects we invest in no longer contribute to worsening the problem, which is climate change, and also ensuring that what we do is quite resilient going forward. Then moving on. So as I said, we have a number of partners. I think what is very important, particularly if you want to mobilize the private sector, is that you productize the approach. With productize, I mean we have let's say where we work with cities, municipalities. We have, as already was said, this Green City Action Plan. So a bit more systematic approach than kind of an ad hoc approach in order to frame the issues, and also to enable lessons learned and communication. Another one is what we call EBD FinTech, which is our technology transfer mechanism. So if you have a country where you want to introduce, let's say, heat pump technology, we have a mechanism kind of to lower the initial uptake by the market of this technology. And then another one is our gaps, which is at the moment close to 5 billion in investments to local banks across the region. And this is a very standardized approach, and to which we also help the local banks to start preparing for them, let's say, to deal with all kinds of regulations that come through the TCFD, through the SEC, as you saw last week in the US and so on. Now, another important thing, and increasingly important, is NDCs are important, but typically NDCs lay out the land for 5 years. We, as financiers, we have a longer horizon. So long-term strategies, low-carbon pathways are very important in order to inform our investment processes. And here we very closely work together with other MDBs. We have a working group that looks into LTS. That working group also established a number of high-level principles for our work among the MDBs on long-term strategies. As an example, we're currently engaging on an activity with Uzbekistan on, let's say, their long-term strategy. But we also look at very much at sector level, such as the power sector, the cement sector, the fertilizer sector. All of these sectors have their own, let's say, identifiable issues that need to be resolved. And the Green City Action Plans is an example per se as to how that could work on a municipal level. Then last but not least, also corporates need to, let's say, deliver their contribution to the resolve of the problem. And so this is about, let's say, determining when a company goes net zero, how they're going to achieve it, what kind of investments or kind of use of market mechanisms they can deploy in the process. Then last but not the least, I believe, yeah, that's the last slide. And that's on markets. So, and particularly carbon markets. This is going to be very important. I think we kind of look at climate finance, 100 billion and a lot of public finance, but that by no means will ever be enough to really foster the transition. And so carbon pricing is going to be very important going forward and will help. And also the tradability. The tradability is in order for societies to and economies to cost effectively reach a target. Sharing the burden, the overall cost to the economies can come down, and without so it's not always about increasing the numbers. We also need to start to show some fiscal discipline here and start to work on mechanisms that reduce the cost to deliver on the climate agenda. I leave it at this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You talked a lot about cities. You're the first one from Ms. El Sharif. I'd like to give the floor to President Mohamed Lansar. You are a former Minister of Interior Affairs and you are the honorary president of the National Association of Governors in Morocco. You're going to introduce to us the focus on the subnational level of climate action and what it has to deal with the climate financing. Thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you so much, Carlos.
Do you? It's okay?
If you need the headset, you may need to leave.
Yes.
You can take my...
Ah. Vous pouvez enlever, voilà, comme ça. Sorry, on va attendre un petit peu le temps que... Sorry, no, I don't. No, I know how to say shukran.
Vraiment?
I just did.
Oh, okay.
Moroccan dialect.
That okay? I think it's okay. Mr. Lenza, thank you.
شكرا.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carlos, and thank you all. And from my role, I want to thank all of the organizers to this event for hosting this event in the United Arab Emirates. In fact, what I wanted to talk about, with thanks God. Now, my role is very easy. It's easy and very easy because the previous speakers and panelists spoke about a number of aspects that I wanted to talk about, and and I will have enough time for the part which I care more about, which is called the Turabi groups, and there are small groups within different areas, and some of the entities, some calls it areas or sectors, or and why do I want to talk about that? Because I'm not only here to talk about what was done by Morocco as far as their commitment with Paris Convention, but they had a very crucial role in this COP26 and 21 and 22 in 2016, and we were committed, and Morocco was committed and still committed, because we are within a geographic area that suffers from all kind of climate change, with desertation and agriculture issues and all of the other climate change related issues. And you know the role of Morocco, and Morocco is really ambitious in this, and all of the reports were reviewed last July, and that is to upscale the current goals. And also in Morocco, when it comes to Turabia, we have a very great experience and long experience with the non-central works. Since the 70s of the last decade, we started in Morocco in a non-central approach, where different groups do have different specializations, which are very important. And 2015, and that was in line. It's not a coincidence, and it was planned for. In 2015, there was a rehab and requalification for all of these groups, to give them and to empower them with more qualifications and specializations, and which we call the free preparation. And in 2015, the advanced entity was established. We did have different entities, but there was no such entity who was very specialized, and the achievement was up to 60 to 70% of the investments of the country, and participate in the funding of 40% of the country's projects. And here the vision was established to tackle everything related to climate and climate change. and the green Morocco, agriculture. So where are all of these are being achieved? It's achieved within the communities, the civil communities, and we cannot talk about the policies to overcome the obstacles and the challenges of climate change if we don't involve the societies and the community to reduce their energy consumption and to change the pattern of life and the way they in the COP21 and 22 there was a dialogue with the parties from Africa to sense about this role, which is very important. And it was not the only summit for Morocco to participate in, but lots of other parties also participated, and they shared the experiences, and we talk from the experiences of others, because it's all about give and take when it comes to sharing the experiences. So it became very crucial that all of the groups to be involved, because they are the main pillar that works when it comes to the implementation of all of the policies and regulations when it comes to the climate change issues and tackling it. So where are the competencies? I saw on the map a while ago, the map for the funding, the different directions of fundings, the number of funders, donors, who will fund, and how can these projects be? All of this is new to us and new to the groups, and it wasn't new for the groups, and therefore we had to be friends with them and to talk to them, including the international funds for the projects, and we started to work on that since 2015 and to 2020. And based on that, and one of the most important things here, that we had we had a manual for the non-government level or non-national level, so which discusses about all the resources and competencies, qualifications, and how to prepare for all of the projects and how to conduct it. And therefore, it was very important for these groups, because they're the one responsible for it. Therefore, we are looking for sharing these ideas and experiences and take from the experiences from the government in Africa and the MENA region as well, and to have well preparation for the COP by the end of this year in Cairo, because now it became really important to have a successful plans. All of these plans must be successful, and we cannot have that success if the local and national entities and the societies and communities are well involved and they manage, and if they're not in the front line as well. So therefore, we look forward to share the Moroccan experience in all of these areas, and we take from them. And we know that Egypt, Jordan, they do have a lot of experiences, and we should work all together. And this is a new field for all of us, and we should have enough information and experiences. So all of these benchmarking and sharing experiences also gets into the interest of the groups within Morocco. And we had what's called the structure of non-central cooperation, where dealing with the African and non-African countries as well. So in conclusion, we cannot succeed if we did not have we cannot reach to all of these goals if we did not have the right involvement, cooperation with between the groups and the governments and the countries as well. So this is what we aim for and what we aim to reach. Thank you so much.
Yes, there were a slight misunderstanding in terms of interpretation. Groups is local and regional governments. It's cities and regions. It explains a little bit more the concept shared by President Lansar. Thank you very much. I'd like to, we have very little time, we were late, but we have 7 minutes. Maybe one question to all of you, and maybe Dalia, you will be the first one to answer. You are all experts in your field. What would be the first move to accelerate in your field, in what you presented? What would be for you the first thing to do, and what could be, in terms of partnerships, pushed for COP27 as a key game changer now that the Paris Agreement is going forward and being implemented thanks to the Glasgow Pact. Dalia, how do you see this for the private sector? You listed a lot of things to do, but first things first, what would you say?
First thing first, I would say that, as I noted earlier, the development of a regional climate finance taxonomy. That's very important, because once you're going to do that, it would enable the various stakeholders, and namely the private sector, to better understand climate-related risk and opportunities, and to better respond to market opportunities. Meaning is that it would be able to better make well-informed decisions related to climate investment opportunities through proper risk assessment and due diligence. Second, the preparation of a pipeline of bankable investment opportunities. That's very important. The way I see it, Carlos, is that it's very important for the government to act as the catalyst and the market maker for climate action in the region. You have the public sector or the government, and you have at the other end people of the MENA region, the recipient, and they are the one that you need to ensure their public support. And you have the private sector, your key partner in financing and in implementing. There is a line or a mechanism that you need to link between the public sector and the private sector, and that is climate finance. So you need, as a government, to enable the private sector to get finance by empowering financial institutions to increase funding flows towards climate action. And the regional climate finance taxonomy is very important. The role of the government in the preparation of the pipeline of bankable climate-related investment opportunities is very important. Another point is that it's very important to strengthen the institutional capacity of national implementing agencies to be able to access the resources available at dedicated climate funds, like Green Climate Aid Fund and Adaptation Fund, because this has proven to be difficult for a national implementing agency because of lengthy and complex procedure. And you know that some of the national implementing agencies lack the know-how and the experience, to collect the data, to categorize them, and to develop funding proposals. So that's what I think for, and there is another point actually, because it may be often neglected to conduct large awareness and education campaigns about the merits of climate action. You need to ensure public support. Once you do that, you're going to promote more sustainable consumption and production patterns. So you're going to raise demand for more responsible green investment. So it's a kind of all interlinked loop. That's how I see it actually.
Thank you so much, Dalia. Shada, you were agreeing a lot. Do you want to comment? Come, join us.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to fully agree with you, Dalia, and I think exactly those are the pieces that you mentioned were the ones that I tried to highlight, I think, in Jordan, is that the government really has to do their homework with the pipeline preparation, but and then communicate it. I think sometimes we stop at preparing, but then we need to actually engage and communicate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Willem. This is a call for support. What can you do?
Well, we already do quite a bit. As I said, we have for SMEs credit lines in a number of the countries. For acceleration, yeah. For acceleration, as I said, a lot of the constraints are in the policy and regulatory field. Yeah. So if you resolve, let's say, improve energy efficiency standards, put a price on carbon, ensure your public procurement is done in a green way, then you create mechanisms that create markets to which the private sector can respond to. Let's say just pushing on the finance side is not going to work because companies want to see a return. Yeah, so they need a market in which they can make a return. It's as simple as that. And it's really about creating the green markets, and then of course then there will be a suite of assistance, technical assistance, etc. in helping out on project preparation, etc. But again, it's about setting the green market standards, and here things like the NGFS is helping out on that enabling environment. Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. What I will say about my vision concerning the future, I will be optimistic because especially in Morocco, what I observed that there is an awareness of all stakeholders about the importance of the topic and the impact of the economy and the life population. And I think that there is a dynamic in Morocco, a dynamic that was created and accelerated by the organization of the 2022 in Marrakesh, COP22. And but there are some challenges that we have to address. I can resume these challenges about 4 or 5 elements. The first one is data. Data, we have to prepare reliable data because it's a big work that must be taken into at a level, national level. The second one is about the coordination. We have the national NDC, we have the decarbonization, and we have sectoral strategies. And the role is to synchronize all these strategies. This is an important issue, and we can talk about taxonomy. Taxonomy very important because if you want to identify the field green activities, we have to put in place taxonomies, and there is a lot of there is different taxonomies, national and sectorial. And in Morocco, we are working with the Société Financière Internationale, international company, financial company, to put in place a taxonomy only in the financial sector. And this will help us to reorient the funding to green activities. And we can talk about, that was mentioned by all experts, the capacity building and expertise. We have to build a pipeline of expertise and share experience with all other countries. And this is very important because you know there is a sophistication in this field to modeling scenarios, to predict, to anticipate, to estimate the impact of environmental and climate change. Very important. And I think that all this 5 or 4 aspects will help us to reorient the funding to this to finance the huge need of strategies of all projects that we find in DC, in decarbonization, and to help MSMEs to adapt their mechanism and their logistics to this field. Thank you very much.
Venkata, you want to add something? So, okay, thank you. In that, let's say, context, why, President Lensa, why should we care about subnationals? why do you do? Because what do you have to do with all this discussion about climate finance and framing the tools, the language, the framework, the risk assessment, etc. Why should we listen to you?
شكرا سأكون.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be very brief and to deliver the message in this regard. All what governments are doing is excellent. We have plans and action. The proposed problems or dilemmas, here lies the problem. When we discuss the problem, I was a minister before, and it is really difficult to ask for something in the decentralized area, let's say. I would like to tell a joke, a short joke. When I was a minister for the transport and post mail, we created the National Bureau for Transport and Post mail. And my workmates used to tell me, "You are a fool. Are you a fool? When you do this, what will you have remained for you if you decentralize your position?" So there is this kind of belief, and that is difficult to decentralize. And there are a lot of wastes of money because a lot of projects do not meet the needs that were supposed to be. So that's why there should be clear planning, coordination in order to meet those goals. There should be great efforts to enable and raise the awareness of the citizens. That's why when we wear all these thinking caps, we should defend all these bodies and entities and the achievements. There should be no competition or internal competition. We should be collaborating and making synergy of our efforts, and we should be ready to reach all these goals. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So we need an institutional Big Bang. That's the conclusion. Thank you. You are all agents of this happen. I really want to thank all our panelists. Venkata, you should join us for the final salutations. Dalia, thank you so much for joining us from Cairo. I hope next time you could join us on time. Really, thank you. Thank you, the audience. Sorry, we have no time for questions, but the speakers are still here, so you can ask for some precisions later. Please come join us. Thank you. And yes, we have some copies of the guide for some national climate finance in Arabic. So please come to the first row and you will get your own copy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you to the technical team again and the interpreters. And we're going to have a photo. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.